Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier. Joined as always, my co-host Nick Velato. We're back. We're talking Giants football here. Been a slow last, 72, whatever. Add another 24. My math gets grimy at that point. 96 hours or so on the Giants front. We got the news last week. The Giants are retaining Brian Daboll and Joe Shane. And the expectation, at least given based on John Mara's comments, or maybe they would move forward with a different defensive coordinator. We'll talk about that decision in a moment today. We're going to talk about the Giants' decision to, at least according to all reports, one namely from Mike Garafolo, who, when he makes a report, Nick, I just write it down. It's almost as good as gold, that the Giants will be retaining defensive coordinator Shane Bowen. We'll talk about that. But first, we want to get to this explosive article from Jordan Raanan of ESPN that was later corroborated by Dan Duggan, actually, when Duggan quote tweeted at Nick and basically said, like, this is the vibe that I'm getting, and this is what I've heard as well, specifically on the Nick McLeod stuff, but also on some of the other things that were exposed in that article. So we'll talk about that and what that means moving forward, as well as the decision to retain Shane Bowen, or the likely decision to retain Shane Bowen. But before that, Nick, what did you think about give me any quick key takeaways from watching the first weekend of playoff football and maybe how they could apply to the Giants?
Okay, Jaden Daniels. Talk about turning a franchise around. Jaden Daniels is a guy that Giant fans will probably learn to resent, but it's so fun watching him play football. He is uber talented. I low-key love what the Washington Commanders have done. Dan Quinn came in here, and I was a fan of Dan Quinn. Like, look, he's not this flashy X's and O's guy, but I think he's just a competent football mind who understands how to lead men. And sometimes that's all you need to be a successful head coach. And he came in there, and they're a playoff winning team. They went on the road and they defeated the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I'm, I hate that this is a divisional rival. Obviously, like, I got to deal with this stuff twice a year, and we're going to be battling and jostling for position if we get lucky enough to even be good enough to compete with them one day, which I can't believe I'm saying at this moment, but here we are, New York Giants fans. So if there's any positive takeaway for the Giants, it's Washington was the dysfunctional, just lowbrow franchise for how long, and now they're a playoff winning team and they have a rookie quarterback. So sometimes if you just strike gold with that and maybe the correct hire and some veterans, you can turn it around quickly, and hopefully the Giants can do that in due time.
That's a good takeaway. I think I'll follow up a little bit on that game specifically. It was really just truly an incredible performance by Jaden Daniels. Talk about just some of the minor things. The over-the-top bomb to Terry McLaurin, the drop right in the bucket, was a beautiful, perfect throw. Some of the plays he made when the pockets broke down and he's just so calm, scans, gets out, finds a receiver. He's always keeping his eyes downfield now, finding receivers on those plays. But the two massive plays that were just special moments, truly special moments from Jaden Daniels, were the fourth down in the goal, the 4th and 2, I think, in the red zone, where he snaps the ball, goes to his play side. His play side's broken. There's nothing over there on the play side. The route combination is figured out by the defense. He's so quick to come off that play side, go to his left, and just fire that ball into space for Terry McLaurin touchdown. And you watch his feet on that play. They don't move much. He found his landmark in the pocket, and he's able to transfer his weight and get the ball into a spot with velocity, with ball placement, with anticipation to the backside of a play. I mean, that's a special moment from any quarterback, let alone a rookie. Like, we don't see those backside plays made in the red zone. We see those plays. What we see, Nick, when we've watched Giants football, for the most part, what we see is, if that's not there on the play side, panic in the quarterback's mind. He's either running straight up the A-gap into pressure or trying to roll right, cut off half the field. The play's dead. We're kicking a field goal, or worse, turnover. He'll throw it up for a pick like that Bengals game or whatnot. So that's just the difference. I mean, that's the difference right there. They lose that game without that play. And then obviously the fourth down, Nick. I mean, he's dead to rights in the backfield. Clancy has him. He's special enough to be able to stiff arm him and have the speed to get away from him and make that play to seal the game. He's a special player, Nick. He's had a lot of special moments his rookie season, 5 of these comebacks in the fourth quarter. It is pain that I can't get over as easy as some Giants fans who tell me, like, oh, don't bring it up again. Don't worry about it. Don't talk about May. Don't talk about Daniels. But, I have flashbacks in my mind of Brian Daboll saying, yes, I want to trade up for Jaden Daniels, which just tells me, like, if the Giants had just lost those stupid Redskins and Patriots games, they have Jaden Daniels right now. And I don't think the culture that was enjoyed from winning those games is worth what we lost. And we lost a lot. And there's no guarantee. I agree with you that it's a sign that things can change fast for us, Nick. But the issue is quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels don't enter the NFL often. It's not one a year. It's not often one every 3 years. It's not sometimes even one every 5 years. I I mean, you could get like Kyler Murray's and like the next level, but no one cares about the next level. You want the special level. I'm not crowning him yet. He still has to do this over a course of 3, 4, 5 years. Regression could come. But the moments he's given this fan base in year one are truly special. And now for the rest of the games, Nick, kind of disappointing, I thought. I think it kind of shaped up a little bit like the college football playoff, where there's just the haves and have-nots in football. We needed to get to Ravens Bills, okay? That's what we needed to get to. That's what this conference is about, right? We needed to get to Lions versus now the Commanders. And Eagles, that's the one that I had one more comment on, Nick. I'll say this. I get a vibe that we may not be disappointed by the end of the season. A lot of Giants fans are resigned to the fact the Eagles might win the Super Bowl and are most likely to win the NFC. I'm not as sold on that. Their offense just, like, it'll work. They'll never be out of games with that offense, Nick, because they can run the football at ease. But, man, that passing game just looks just not where it needs to be in the playoffs. And to get the kind of body language we saw from that passing game, A.J. Brown, it's in the playoff game. It feels to me, Nick, and I hope I'm right, that there will be some disappointment in Philly's future. I don't know if it's going to happen this week. I think it'll, Vikings or Rams, whoever they play. We're recording this on Monday, but I have a better feeling than a lot of my friends. Like, my brother is so resigned to the fact the Eagles are just winning the Super Bowl or winning the NFC at the very least. I don't know. I don't get that feel watching their offense.
Neither do I. And I think they could. They easily could. I don't think the Lions are slouches. And I think the Rams or the Vikings could play spoiler. And a lot of the reasons why is because of Jalen Hurts in the passing attack. I think if you stop the run and you force Jalen Hurts to throw the football consistently, it may put Philadelphia at a slight disadvantage depending on what the opponent's offense can do. So we'll have to wait and see. They can Philadelphia could easily win, but I'm not sitting here saying, oh, punch their ticket to the Super Bowl. This episode is brought to you by Skims. Get your hands on the best underwear in the land. Look, I'm sure, gentlemen, you're a lot like me. You don't want your fit to be too compact, nor do you want to be swinging around like you're trying to destroy a piñata. You want everything in place. Comfort on a cloud with no ride-up. That is the ideal situation, and Skims provides that situation for us, gentlemen. They sent me a few pairs. I wear them to work. I wear them while I'm working out, and they are exactly what I'm looking for in my underwear. And Christmas is right around the corner. So grab a pair of Skims for someone in your life. Maybe that someone is you, and you want that comfortable underwear for your whole situation down there. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com. That's skims.com. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show, Big Blue Banter, in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gifts for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever. So visit skims.com to check that out and maximize your draw's comfortability. Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leader in men's lifestyle and grooming. Every man knows the unbeatable feeling of a fresh barbershop shave. Now, what if I told you that you no longer have to wait weeks or even months between appointments to experience it? Introducing Manscaped's newest innovation, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver, the game-changing tool that brings the luxury of professional shave right into your home. Whether you're after that daily silky smooth finish or prefer to maintain a rugged 5 o'clock shadow, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver is your go-to for precision and style every time. Head over to manscaped.com and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using code BIGBLUE for 20% off. Gentlemen, this has changed the grooming game for me, and I highly recommend it for you. Get the Chairman Pro today and experience a shave that is as smooth as you deserve. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com.
With all that said, Nick, their defense really does look pretty special, Philly's defense. So it's a problem. They've built it. It's Fangio, and it's Fangio 14 games into a coaching stint, which is always better. They start to get the gel down, and they just built out so much talent, man. They just build out rosters so well, Howie Roseman and that crew. Like, you look at it, and there's always depth on the D-line. They never have issues with depth there, even when injuries happen. Brandon Graham, it doesn't matter. And in addition to always having depth on the D-line, they just add talent. They have just assets. Like, they had 2 assets this year, Nick, to use on defensive backs, and they're both working out, Kenyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. And there were two guys who you looked at this draft class, Nick, and you studied it and you said, I think anyone who studied this class, like you and I did, and really watched a lot of the tape on these guys, were like, you can watch those guys after 1 or 2 games and be like, these are probably two of the best 3, 4, 5, maybe 2 defensive backs in this class, right? Like Cooper DeJean was unreal on tape, and Keenan Mitchell was really good in what you wanted him to do, which is, stay in phase and play that position. So they know what they're doing. They're going to be a team we have to worry about for the rest of our lives, probably, Nick, unfortunately, unless they get really unlucky at some point. Because they're kind of proving in my mind, Nick, that they don't really need a lead.
Well, it's true though. I know. But my dad's whole thing is Philadelphia never gets any injuries. Not that he's hoping for injuries, but his whole thing is like, oh, they never get injured. The Giants, the guy stubs his toe and he's out for the whole season. Like my dad would just go on these like long rants, and I'm like, yeah, no, Dad.
I just feel like it's like this. We can look at what the Eagles have done now and be like, objectively speaking, they're doing this without elite quarterback play, and it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're this good without having hit on quarterback, really, I mean, he's kind of a hit, Jalen Hurts, but like,
it's so Jalen Hurts, he has that rushing ability. The tush push is a massive thing as well.
He throws a good over the top deep pass.
He throws a good over the top deep pass. He's a leader. I know that like there have been some fractures in that locker room, at least reportedly there have been some fractures in that locker room, but I think he's well respected as well. And you surround him with that type of infrastructure on the offensive side of the football, that guy can have success. But there aren't many teams who have that type of infrastructure where you have Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson as your tackles, and then you land a Landon Dickerson, and you land a Cam Jurgens, and you had Jason Kelsey, and you have that offensive line, and then you go out and you trade for AJ Brown, you get a guy like Dallas Goedert, you trade up in the draft to get Devonta Smith. So you do all of these, and then you sign Saquon. But like that is an incredible place for a quarterback to play. So you can be an average quarterback and have your average nature heightened and maximized. And I think that's kind of what Philadelphia has done for a player like Jalen Hurts, because people have made that comparison. Oh, Jalen Hurts and Daniel Jones, they are the same. If you put Daniel Jones in the Philadelphia Eagles offense, would he be Jalen Hurts? I'm not sold on that, but Daniel Jones is also not an average starting quarterback. I would say he's a below average starting quarterback. So I think that's the reality of the offense with Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles. And I mean, he's brought a team to the Super Bowl before, and he was good enough in that game to win.
He played great that year. I think if he played like that the last 2 years, I would have had a very different opinion on Jalen Hurts.
I agree.
I thought he was phenomenal that year he took him to the Super Bowl. I just haven't seen him get back to that point yet. And I don't know when he will or if he will, based on just kind of the trajectory of how this career is going. But again, like I said, I don't know if it matters. The Eagles are kind of quarterback proof. They've figured out a way to be that in a sense, in a league where that's almost impossible, right? Like all the best teams have the best quarterbacks. The Ravens, the Bills, now the Commanders are moving on around because of their quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and also with Green Bay too. Green Bay, they were just. Who was you were playing receiver for them?
They had so many unfortunate injuries, and there's no timing rapport. It's terrible.
Elgin Jenkins went down on the first drive, and they had to bring in these guys who like have never seen any snaps before, and it's just like that's going to debilitate your game plan. Like LaFleur had to coach that game with one hand tied behind his back when you lose somebody as important as Elgin Jenkins. You don't have Christian Watson. Jaden Reed goes down. Romeo Doubs gets concussed. And you're down to Malik Heath, Bo Melton, and freaking Dontavian Wicks. And I like Wicks. I think Wicks is a good player. And I think Melton has some upside. But you saw, even on that last play, Malik Heath can't get his foot in bounds. And that's like a routine NFL catch that Dobbs or Reed would have made very easily. So it's one of those situations where Green Bay was very unfortunate. And then the Eagles were able to just take advantage of that at home in a very friendly environment.
Yeah. And then on the other side of the ball, other side of the conference, we have, little disappointment there with the Steelers end the season. Russell Wilson, I think there's a lot less, he made some good throws in that game, by the way. The pick and touchdown, phenomenal. And he's still probably good enough to do that, but he's not somebody who's going to kind of change your franchise, at least from a quarterback standpoint. He's just like a stopgap, and that's kind of what we wanted for the Giants this year.
Yeah, he's like 37, dude.
Yeah, we didn't want to punt on this position, but he's just someone to consider because he's going to be a free agent, and the Giants are, dipping their toes in a horrific market that is the quarterback market year after year after year from a free agency standpoint. And they just have to make a decision somewhere. I don't know what it'll be. I still kind of want it to just be Jameis just for the fun of Jameis and Neighbors and utilizing a player like Neighbors and Wandell in different ways, more vertically. I mean, he raised the NFL air yardage average by an insane number. He'll just throw it up there for Neighbors. And look, he made Jerry Jeudy look like a wide receiver 1 for a stretch. And Jeudy hasn't looked like that his whole career. So it's still probably where I'm at with that from the shitty market that is the free agent market, but just one guy to consider there. But anyway, let's talk Giants football, Nick. Let's start with this Jordan Raanan article. It was a really exposing article. I think we can probably start, like, there's a lot of different places to go with this.
Yeah.
But let's start with what was, I think, to most people, the most shocking and glaring part of this article, which was the stuff surrounding Nick McLeod, who was signed to the Giants on a 1-year, $2.98 million deal as a restricted free agent. So that was his current salary. And this is according to the article, Nick, we'll start here. According to multiple Giants players, that's kind of crazy to me. Shane told McLeod's representatives, don't pay October's rent, all right? As soon as I can replace him, I'm going to replace him. I'm not effing around. The Giants general manager then hung up the phone. McLeod started 4 more games for the Giants, and he was released on November 5th, signed with the 49ers practice squad, and worked his way up to their active roster. So that is a really, really troubling quote.
It reflects very poorly on Joe Shane. And a lot of this checks out if you remember back to when Nick McLeod signed on the practice squad with the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of Giants players were liking it, and they were saying, like, I think one of them said something or alluded to, like, oh, you're free, or something to that degree or something. If that's the case, man, like, that's rough. I don't know how all these players heard this, if this was something that was publicly said around the facility. I am uncertain of that, but this tends to track with a lot of the strange social media posts that certain Giants players were making, because it's true. Nick McLeod, his locker was next to Brian Burns and Darius Slayton. Brian Burns is one of the most well-respected defensive leaders on the team, even though he hasn't been here all that long. And then Darius Slayton is one of the most well-respected offensive ones. And then, so those guys are boys with Nick McLeod. And I was at training camp, man. I saw Nick McLeod. That guy was always out there. He was one of the first ones out there practicing on his technique and his movements and getting stretched out and getting ready. Everything the Giants had asked this guy to do, he did it. And to be treated like that, that's some Dave Gettleman type of handling. If you remember back when Dave Gettleman was with the Carolina Panthers, a lot of older players like really resented Dave Gettleman. So that just is a terrible look for Joe Shane and this entire situation, the locker room, and with all these guys being retained as well. It's not great, bro.
And I feel like John Mara as an owner has really my entire life been big on, like, we do the right things the right way, the Giant way.
Good job.
Right. And so, there's plenty of examples throughout our time. Obviously, the one main one that he fumbled the bag on was the Josh Brown one. But there are examples of him saying that he wants to do things a certain way, to uphold to a certain standard. For example, he said during his end of the season presser, we'll never tank. The day we tank, this day you won't see me on this side of the grass. And so he'll say that, but then we're penny pinching a contract like Nick McLeod's. And that should be something that stands out to him as something that he doesn't want from his general manager, right? Or he doesn't want to be assigned to the Giants. He doesn't want to be reading an article like this or having an article like this circulate where this kind of information is revealed. So it's surprising to me that he knew this, or I'm sure he knew of this. And it doesn't impact his decision on Joe Shane. I really think he was dead set, Nick, on just this idea that, like, I can't just keep firing and hiring general managers and head coaches. I need to give this, whatever this pick I made a couple of years ago, a good long 3-4 years before I can really, 4 or 5 years, I should say. It's already been 3 before I can really evaluate this and to let them play out their plan. Let's say maybe Joe Shane walked in and it was a 5-year plan, right?
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, dude.
But that's not reassuring for us, because what we're looking at, the way that Nick and I are looking at it, and you guys are looking at it, is probably, well, didn't we have the same, like, it's, and we'll talk about this a bit with the Shane Bowen decision. It reminds me of, like, when Dave Gettleman told us, we're going to bring back Jason Garrett for next year as our offensive coordinator. And my main reason is I don't want Daniel Jones to learn a new system. But we knew, Nick, from watching the tape, that his system was broken. And it didn't matter about continuity. What was more important was getting the right people in, the right coach in for Daniel Jones or whoever at quarterback at that time. It was only Jones' only option we've ever had for, like, the last 6 years. But, that didn't make it right. And this kind of reminds me of that. It's on a different level, but it reminds me a lot of, like, just because it's continuous doesn't mean it's right.
100%. We said this on the last podcast.
Yeah.
What did Joe Shane and Brian Daboll do to retain their jobs?
It's hard to find any reason.
It really is very hard. Now, I know there's an alternative, and maybe John Mara wasn't confident in some of the other options that were out there. And he said, let's just stick it through and see if we can come out on the other side of this. But there is nothing that inspires any hope. And this is even separate from the Raanan article. There's nothing that has inspired any hope for the future with Joe Shane, this roster, and even Brian Daboll as well. Like, you can say if you get Brian Daboll that quarterback, then maybe he can get back to that 2022 form and be the coach. All that, that's all well and good. We'll get into Brian Daboll in a little bit. But the end of the day, Dan, neither of these guys have done anything to keep their jobs. They're only keeping their jobs because the owner of the New York Giants is sick of firing so many people and not getting it right. So he wants to give them a little bit more of a chance. I don't know if Joe Shane went there like, look, John, here's the plan. Bop, 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 bop. This is what we're going to do. And he's like, oh, that's a great plan. We're going to stick it out. I don't think that's necessarily what happened. I think it was just, well, let's just see what happens. Try to get a quarterback and see if we can get Coach Daboll back to his 2022 form.
Sure. And
that seems to be the reality right now.
Yeah, it's our reality that we're living in. And for me, it's not the darkest of realities or darkest of timelines, Nick, just because I really do believe that before anything gets better, it's not going to be just recycling and cycling in new coaches. It's going to be, we have to get this roster right. I still believe the players play and the coaches coach. I'm a strong believer in that. And what I mean by that is the coaches have their role in wins and losses, but the players are really determining what happens as far as us as a fan base goes. Yeah, sorry, go ahead if you have something on that.
No, you're 100% correct. But one way to ensure that your roster can be built up and to cultivate a positive environment that people want to come and play is to not have shit like this happen, right, where you're having Nick McLeod be told, don't pay your rent. Like, you don't need those types of stories. That is a toxic environment that no one's going to really want to join. And if you go read through that article, Dan, like, again, Jordan Raanan on ESPN, he did an excellent job on this article. I encourage anybody to go and read it. You can see, like, the players, Illuminor talked about it, a lot of players. There were players who were checked out throughout the season. Players were upset that Deonte Banks can continuously not give effort and then not be punished for it until that Pittsburgh game when he finally got benched like 27 snaps into the game because he continuously did not give up. These players pick up on shit like that. And when you're losing franchise and you're not winning football games, you're going to that entire strategy is going to blow up in your face. These are alpha males, dude. These guys are the top of the top. They have been the best athletes in their high schools and in their colleges, and they go into the NFL and they need to respect the people who lead them. And I'm uncertain if there is a respect from the top down in that locker room. I think they like Brian Daboll, and Raanan, I think, said this. They like Brian Daboll as a person because he's the player's coach. But I don't know if they respect the lack of conviction that Brian Daboll and Joe Shane have had on a variety of moves. And Raanan went through a lot of them, but you can just go through it, like how they handled the tackle situation with Josh Azudu, we're going to start Tommy DeVito over Drew Lock, even though Drew Lock is the quarterback too. This flip-flopping nature, when you don't have a strong conviction, it shows a lack of preparation and a lack of confidence. And I think that's the issue in this locker room right now, other than the losing, obviously. But I think it's much harder when you're a losing franchise to get out of losing if there is no respect in the locker room. If you respect your leaders, I think it's easier to win football games and get out of that pit, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. And some of the things you touched on are, discussed at length in this article as well. Like, you talked about, the players do like Brian Daboll. They probably do for the most part, playing for Brian Daboll, but the reason being is not the reasons you want. Like, there's a reason the Baltimore players like John Harbaugh, right? Or the reason the Chargers players like Jim Harbaugh or all these other coaches. And it's not the same reason. The reasons we're getting for why they like Brian Daboll, at least in this article, Nick, are he basically runs like a country club type situation. Yeah. Players can start, the days start as late as like 8:30 a.m., which is really late for NFL teams. Like, a lot of these teams start much earlier, right? There's tons of off days in this program that Brian Daboll runs. And, it's fun for players. It's nice that they're probably part of a team that doesn't have to grind them down as much, but that's not going to lead to wins. And that's not a good reason for liking a coach. You want to like a coach because they've built a program that you feel like you are part of as a family and that you are winning and you're working toward a goal. At least that's what I believe. You build a program that makes the players feel like family and they're working toward a goal that everyone agrees on. That goal is to win a Super Bowl. The Giants don't have This Brian Dable Giants haven't had the Super Bowl goal since he got here. It's a reality situation. Their first goal was, let's prove everybody wrong and let's win a playoff game, or let's get to the playoffs. And they did both of those things. But since then, their goal hasn't been the Super Bowl. The last 2 years, only a total fanatical fan would tell you they've had any chance of winning a Super Bowl. Even 2023, only a total idiot would think that Daniel Jones with improved weapons around him could ever win a Super Bowl. And it's the reality situation. I'm sorry to say, but if you watch the tape from 6 years, you've got to be a complete idiot to think that that guy is Super Bowl upside. And it was proven in 2023. And again, this year, when he started games this year, I saw a stat today, Nick, that he was the fourth, according to SIS stats, he was the fourth least accurate quarterback in the NFL this year, Daniel Jones, from a pure ball placement standpoint. I mean, we're talking about somebody who doesn't do anything right and didn't do anything right. And so it's just a matter of like delusion to me. They've delusioned themselves into believing that we can run this country club and it's fine and the players like it. But what does it lead toward? Is that the goal you want as a coach? Is that the goal you want as a franchise, to have a nice, fun type experience where, you know, if things go right, you can catch fire and win 9 games and maybe beat a Vikings team in the playoffs?
Yeah, and the issues are even broader than this. These are some of the ingredients as to why the Giants are dysfunctional and why they suck right now. But the issues also go towards the lack of drafting and the lack of development. And that goes to a totally separate thing that was, I would say, tangentially addressed in the Raanan article, where I don't know, and we brought this up in the podcast, I don't know if Brian Dable and Joe Shane are like tight. You know, like I think there's a lot of resentment and some bad blood there, for a lack of a better term, because you can even see it. And I thought Raanan did a really great job juxtaposing 2 quotes in the article, where it was Joe Shane said, well, you know, during the bye week, we're losing a lot of close games. You know, there are like 1-score games and we're just not getting over the hump. And that might just be an innocuous quote, Dan, but it also might be, well, if our coaches found a fucking way to end a close game with a win, we wouldn't have 1 or 2 wins at this point. And then you can look at Brian Dable after the Indianapolis Colts win. He goes on and he says, well, this is what happens when you have a quarterback, stares at the camera, looking at Joe Shane. You know, like Joe Shane inflates how good the roster is. And I think Brian Dable looks at Shane and said, look, dude, you gave me freaking Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, and Tommy DeVito. Right. Are you kidding me? You didn't address the quarterback position. My best quarterback last year is not on the roster right now. Right. He's still in the damn same city in Tyrod Taylor. So I think there's just resentment right there. Right. Now, could that be mended? Sure, possibly. But that's not a good sign either, Dan.
Yeah, winning mends anything, but you know, how do you get to the winning?
I didn't praise Shane, but we were happy that Shane went out and got Raanan and Illuminor to finally fix the offensive line. And guess what? The offensive line was better than I've seen it in probably a decade, right? But the reason why he had to do that was because he missed on Josh Azudu, right, who was just taking a roster spot and doesn't do anything for this team. I like Josh Azudu. He's a very nice kid, but you can't put him out there. And Evan Neal.
Yes.
And that's on Joe Shane. Or is it on Brian Dable? And I think that's what Joe Shane is saying. That's what Joe Shane is telling himself. I gave you good ingredients. You suck at cooking. You're not developing these guys. I gave you Josh Azudu. I gave you Evan Neal, and your coaching staff is not developing him. What's going on there? And I think that's the duality of the situation, and why they're not on the same page is Brian Dable might think like, you're not giving me good players. And Joe Shane is saying, well, why aren't you developing them? Why aren't you winning those close games? And I think that could be what's going on. And that's a powder keg ready to blow.
It is, especially if they don't start winning fast. I mean, look, with reality situations, we're all kind of looking at the same way. Like, schedule's really hard next year. Very few clear paths toward getting considerably better. We probably know where this thing is headed, sadly, already in January, which is not something I want to really talk about too much, because it's hard to move forward with your thoughts after knowing that and considering that and recognizing that. So we'll just move past it for now and look toward other things. But like, there are other eye-opening stuff in this article. Like, for example, this one really stood out to me, and it's that the players, this is from an offensive player, according to Jordan Raanan, who talked to Raanan. He said, all you want in this league is the truth, an offensive player said of the communication, suggesting, you know, that the communication isn't truthful from Brian Dable, from Joe Shane, maybe, right? Like, they're not hearing the right things. They're not hearing the truthful things. And, you know, he said, when we needed those players who were told, like, for example, Isaiah Simmons, who played 33% of the snaps last year and only 16% this year, and was shocked when he didn't get a snap defensively in week 1. So when we needed those players, they were checked out, said one defensive player, not specifically about Simmons, but others who felt alienated. The idea is this, Nick: players are feeling alienated. They're feeling lied to. That's not the sign of a good team. And it says, it makes you wonder. This is the player. He said, it makes you wonder. This is the quote. Do they believe in me? Do they trust me? You don't want to be thinking that as a player. Do they believe in me, or do they trust me?
No, you don't. No, you don't. That's a very toxic environment that's been created right now. And a lot of it is because of the losing, but you can mitigate the toxicity of losing with good, sound leadership. And that's what I think the Giants lack right now. And that's one of the reasons why this is so dysfunctional. Look, there's a lot of shitty teams in the NFL. And usually when you're a shitty NFL team, it tends to lean towards a dysfunctional environment. But right now, dude, this is also a terrible situation because we have committed another year to this. So are we going to be sitting here 1 year from now being like, well, who are the head coaching options, Dan? And like that seems like I don't want to put the cart before the horse. There's still a lot that has to happen, but that's a plausible scenario, a very plausible scenario that we're probably going to face here in 2026.
And hopefully they're prepared for it, and they start looking way earlier than this year. But some other stuff that stood out to me, the players. So Tommy DeVito said that the team's brass. He said definitely a ton when asked if the team's brass greatly underestimated Barkley's value in the locker room,
Yeah.
which I believe is true. Right, losing to Saquon Barkley really fractured that locker room. But point being, like, if you're relying on your running back to be the guy that keeps your locker room together from a cultural standpoint, then something is off and something is wrong with your head coach and with your general manager, because that's not how, I mean, look, I get it. He meant a lot to that team. And I even look back at it. Sometimes they can be like, what do I really care about the cap space they would have spent on Barkley at this point? Because they're going to be dead anyway in the water for a couple years. If we had just signed Barkley for the 2 last year and we would have had like a 2-3 year contract, it would have almost been over by now. And all the cap would have already been spent. It's not like we're going anywhere. Like right next year, we would have had a big cap hit for him. And it's probably off the books at that point, or you can get out of it without a lot of dead cap. So it's like, in the end, it kind of was not that big of a decision. Short term, long term, we still have our points on why we don't like to pay the position, especially someone's been injured. We have no line. We're not ready to compete. All those factors we already discussed. But like in the short term, kind of like, yeah, but my point being, like, we can't be relying on Saquon Barkley to keep a locker room together. That's your job, Brian Dable. That's your job, Joe Shane. And so greatly underestimating the impact, then find someone else to lead that locker room. And if it's not Daniel Jones, why the F are you telling us he's your QB1? That's the guy who leads the locker room.
Yeah, I tend so I don't disagree with you, but players are always going to have their own player leaders, and Saquon was that for the Giants, man. Saquon was
someone
that.
else has to be when he leaves. Is my point. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a valid point, especially when you're paying a quarterback $160 million. You would expect your quarterback
or the coach, right? Because that's what Tomlin does, right?
Yeah, but I'm talking about just in the locker room. Like anybody who's played sports before, you have your coach, you respect your coach. When your coach isn't there, you're with your boys, and there's a leader there. It doesn't even have to be the best player, but there's a true leader, and everyone knows who that leader is. But it's not something that is addressed. It's just inherent. Like we understand who the leader is. That was Saquon Barkley for the New York Giants, basically since he arrived in 2018. That was Saquon, and Saquon's gone now. And he not only is he gone, he's in the division and he's thriving. And your team sucks, and that's just going to spoil everything else, man. That's going to make your entire already crappy situation much more crappy.
Yeah, you're right about that, Nick. And it's just disappointing to me that was the what is it? The straw that broke the camel's back.
I get that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's to me, it's, you have to be better. What does it say about you as a head coach and you as a general manager, and the regime and the, that you're trying to bring in and the culture you're trying to bring in, if that's enough to break it? And it's not a good sign to me. There was sorry, you have something else?
This is related to Dable, so I wanted to get this out there before we transition away from Dable. The quote in the article about the how Brian Dable handled the players after the Tampa Bay loss, and how Brian Dable was adamant that it's like there was not a lack of effort, it was just a lack of execution, and how Micah McFadden, who was talking to the reporters, revealed that he highlighted while saying that how there were several players who were playing with a lot of effort. But if you watch that game, they seemed completely and utterly dejected and checked out. It was not just, look, I saw about, 15 games this year where there was a lot of lack of execution. That game was different. That was a dejection that they felt. And it could be because of the handling of the Daniel Jones situation, but they were coming off of a bye week facing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home. They should have had a pep in their step, and they were flat. And Dable just did not want the narrative to get out there that these guys have quit on you, because that would have been the straw that broke the camel's back for John Mara. And I just thought that was an interesting part of the article. I wanted to throw that out to you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was, because what I found most interesting about that was what the players in the article, or what Raanan quoted them saying. Like he spent that time after that game trying to prove to us that, this media, or not the media, what you guys said, because after the game, Giants players said they
Yes.
felt like there was a lack. Like, multiple Giants players said they felt like there was a lack of effort. And he is spending that time the next week on a short week when they had to play Dallas on Thursday, trying to prove to the players, no, you're wrong. There's not effort issue. Look at this. This is an example of effort. Look at this example. And they're like, why didn't we spend that time planning for the Cowboys for our next game? And that's just the type of stuff where it's like, Dable's letting the media get to him. He's letting outside forces and factors get into his head and impact his ability to lead and coach.
Absolutely. And it also all transpired after Deontay Banks, after that whole situation where his effort got called into question multiple times. So effort concerns were something that was stemming from the beginning of the year with your former first round pick, who we were expecting big things from. And it bled to after your bye week. And then he goes and he tries to basically do damage control, Brian Dable, that is, to say, hey, no, you guys weren't quitting. The players know, though. And that's also like a slap to their intelligence, right? Like, they're not dumb. They know it. And you could see just in this article with all these random quotes from certain players, certain anonymous players saying like, yeah, this guy has checked out. We had guys checked out over here. Some of those quotes weren't even anonymous. Like Jermaine Illuminor was very public about his criticism of some of his teammates. And I remember that Tampa game. I remember the players he was talking about who were giving a lot of effort, but it was not the majority of the players. It seemed like a lot of people were just absolutely done, dude. Yeah, it's like the priorities. Your priorities aren't like Brian Dable obviously wants to win football games, but at that point with that specific situation, it seems like his priorities were in a different location. That's a short week, man. You have precious time to prepare for a team that's more than likely going to beat the brakes off of you.
Right, exactly. And that's just another thing in this article that bothered me. I mean, one big thing that we didn't discuss yet was the Giants' handling of the quarterback situation. That was discussed in this article. Darius Slayton talked about it, and he said that he believes the problems can be traced back to the offseason when the team's brass was publicly searching for Daniel Jones' replacement, and it was captured on Hard Knocks. Now, look, I want to be clear about this. I don't blame the Giants at all for publicly searching for Daniel Jones' replacement. Only a goddamn idiotic team wouldn't try to be replacing that guy. And it's the truth of the matter. I'm sorry it bothers people, but the Giants are allowed to and should be. They'd be bigger idiots if they didn't. If they were just like, nope, we're good at quarterback. Let's move on. Don't consider anybody in the draft. Don't worry about free agency. But what Slayton's point is not that they're, stupid for doing it. It's that when you do it and you put it on Hard Knocks, it becomes a big public thing. So Slayton said it becomes a bigger monster. Slayton said of the public scrutiny of Jones and the Giants broadcasting publicly into the teammates that they're searching for his replacement. And it created what several players, not just Slayton, described as an awkward vibe between Dable and Daniel Jones. And it could be seen and heard in Jones's comments when he, said, ask Dave's or whatnot. And, the quarterback rarely shown emotion on the field and his interaction with the media in the 6 years before that. So, and then Wan'Dale Robinson, I don't think Daniel Jones was the most confident to start the year. That's not a great sign for your starting quarterback. But, the way I look at that, Nick, is, again, like, put some onus on the player, the quarterback. Like, you got to be confident, man. That's the only way it works. And if they're searching for a replacement and they don't go replacement, so what? This is not a scholarship business. And just because they signed you 2 years ago, you stunk up, and you need to do better. And it's not about, we're not catering to you, we're not babying you. I've always hated the baby culture of like, you can't put a good backup behind your quarterback because it scares him. You know how I felt about that, Nick. I want to get a good quarterback room as good as I can get. I don't want to baby a quarterback and give him don't put any pressure on him. Make sure he knows that you really are fully behind him. This was year, 6, Nick? Like, those days are long over at that point. Like, you are what you are, play better, do better, and help us win games. Enough of us telling you you're the solution, you're the guy, and we've made everything so bad around you. Do better, play better, and get your confidence from playing well. And so that one bothered me a little bit, but the point being, there was a clearly awkward, contentious relationship with Jones and Dable. That was from the start of the year. How do you expect to win a year, Nick, when your quarterback and your coach have an awkward relationship? That's unbelievable to me, really and truly, that had transpired. It's not surprising, but it's unbelievable.
It's very unbelievable. I would love to know the conversations between Dable, Shane, and the Giants scouting staff. I wish we got to see that on Hard Knocks heading up to that draft and to see how hard Brian Dable was pushing or advocating for the Giants to do whatever they could to replace Daniel Jones or find somebody who could push Daniel Jones. Because if that's the case, man, I feel like I don't think Dable has handled this situation well, but I would feel much more empathy towards Brian Dable.
Agreed.
You know, if he was like, hey, like literally second anything, just get me somebody else that's not just Tommy DeVito. But Dable could have also been like, I like Tommy DeVito and I want him on the roster. Let's just find anybody else to bring in here. They ended up settling on Drew Lock, and that was an absolute disaster for the New York Giants. But that's something I would love an answer to.
A disaster, except for the one game he had the fourth best QBR,
Dude.
whatever it was in the history of football, and cost us the #1 pick. So somehow that one game he played like an all-pro. Point being, like, just to corroborate what you said, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, Nick, but I'll bring it up again. I know for a fact that it is not a one-to-one, like, oh, the GM and the head coach are always on the same page. Because, and I'll say it now, it's so long past the point, I don't think he would mind me saying it. I think he said it on another podcast or something. But I met and I interviewed back in the day when I was working 24/7 Sport, John Fox, the Giants' former defensive coordinator and the former head coach of the Bears. And John Fox told me that when they drafted and traded up for Mitchell Trubisky, he didn't want that at all. Let me be clear. He did not want them to do that at all. The GM wanted that, and the GM wins. So there is a true and possible, it's not true, but there is a strong possibility that Brian Dable and Joe Shane were not aligned on Daniel Jones at all, and could have been not aligned on him for a very, very long time. Because it's happened before, and it'll happen again, and we'll never get the information like you said on it, Nick. Hard Knocks didn't show it. The Giants didn't want to reveal that, and they obviously never would. But there is a clear possibility, especially when you read these comments from players, where it says there was an awkward vibe between them the entire season from the very start. So it's just a matter of, like, the GM wins, the GM decides. And we even heard it, like you said, in Dable's comment, like, see what happens when I get decent quarterback play. I can actually win a freaking football game when my quarterback just going to turn the ball over and actually move the ball with his arm and throw a football that actually looks half decent for half the game. So, like, it's just like, it's frustrating, man, but it's possible. It's possible that these two are more disconnected than we believe, which makes it even scarier, dude, that they're bringing them back. Because, like, the whole point and what they're selling to us on them bringing them back is they're together. They came in together. Let them build out the program that they were brought in to bring.
I agree, and I know this sounds like a little bit paradoxical, but I would still prefer them to bring them both back instead of firing one.
Yeah.
Even if there is a disconnect, because that disconnect could possibly be rectified. These guys' wives are really close, they're close friends. They were in Buffalo together. There's a long history there. And I think with just, I don't know if the resentment will come to a boiling point like we've seen other general manager and coaching pairings. There's always going to be some contentiousness when two men are doing a job and they're both struggling and they're losing, and one of them feels like it's because of the decisions of the other. But at least these guys have a foundation of a friendship, I would even say. So hopefully they can get back to that. I'm just a little uncertain. And if it is the case that Brian Dable was advocating strongly for a quarterback last year and they didn't really get one for him, you best believe they're doing it this year. Again, like, I think Joe Shane might he could sign 2 free agents and draft somebody. Like, I wouldn't be overly shocked if he just pours assets into the quarterback room. And frankly, I hope that he does, because that's the only hope at this point, Dan, for this regime to turn this around. Unless we want them to lose just to get them fired in 2026, which there might be a contingent of the fan base that wants that. But the only hope to turn this around is to land that quarterback. And if we're not going to get like that top flight, like Shedeur Sanders, if people want that, or Cam Ward, if they're not going in that direction, you need to just throw darts at that board. And even if you go in that direction, you should still throw another dart at that board just to be safe.
Agreed. And then you could maybe not start him if the other guy's winning games and let him grow and learn. Though I did hear Peyton Manning say that he believes that Eli Manning in his first rookie season and Peyton in his first rookie season, and this is what Eli told Peyton, learned a lot more from playing than sitting. I am on that camp. I don't believe in the sitting. I know it's work kind of with like Jordan Love and stuff, but I don't think that has to do with that as much as other people do. I believe you learn from playing and getting reps, and I stand by that, and I'm strong about that. You can be ruined too if you're like Derek Carr and you have just like a horrific O-line.
It's an individual basis thing.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Yep. But on that front, it's like interesting to me, because if there is if they are friends, like you said, Shane and Dable, but there is a disconnect over how they've handled the quarterback position, some of that comes down to, the reality of the situation, which was they couldn't trade up for Jaden Daniels. They couldn't trade up for Drake May. Some people believe they could have. I don't believe the Patriots were ever going to trade that pick, no matter what, unless it was the dumbest offer ever, like a Mike Ditka type offer. Trade the whole draft class for Ricky Williams type offer. And so they were never out on that. But now the question is, Nick, was there a disconnect on neighbors over guys like Bo Nix, neighbors over guys like Michael Penix, neighbors over guys like JJ McCarthy? That's where we're at, because you can tell that Joe Shane, there was no disconnect for him. He was said look, we're going to get Daniel Jones, the star wide receiver, and we're going to see if we can make this contract work. And that's he who gave out the contract. That's his. I still believe to this day, Joe Shane made a terrible, selfish decision on that front to try to justify the contract that he handed out and make it look better for him. That's my personal opinion on that. It'll never be proven or disproven. But Brian Daboll, we don't know where he was at. He could have been at, no, I can't make this quarterback Daniel Jones work. Look at the goddamn tape and see it. This guy, he doesn't throw with anticipation. I'm not going to go over again. Everyone knows all of his limitations. They're not just limitations. They're things that he does poorly as a professional starting quarterback, and they will not be improved on. And he might have been like, I need Penix. I need Nix. I need JJ McCarthy. I need something in here to help me improve this position because, like I told you, we don't win games unless the quarterback plays well. He told us that this year. When he plays well, we win. When he doesn't, we suck. And by he, I mean whoever's playing quarterback.
Yeah.
So there might have been a disconnect on that front. And that is something we'll never know, but it's interesting to me.
It's very interesting. Brian Daboll, we know he loved Malik Neighbors. Who wouldn't love Malik Neighbors? He was that talented. He was that good of a prospect. But we never in Hard Knocks, you correct me if I'm wrong, I said Knocks there, Hard Knocks. We never heard anything about any of the other quarterbacks that were selected after Neighbors. We don't know anything.
A little bit on JJ did we get? I don't remember if we got anything on McCarthy.
I don't think we did. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact, I don't remember hearing anything about Nix, anything about
Joe Shane's daughter being like she wanted us to draft
JJ
McCarthy.
Yeah, and her reasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's an interesting discussion. I'm not certain though. But what about Shane Bowen, Dan?
Yeah, let's get to the decision to retain Shane Bowen, which is most likely happening. We don't know for sure. I actually just saw something I wanted to bring up on this, but yeah. So, I mean, I'll start with this and I'll get to what I was looking for. I'll find it on my computer, but I think for me, generally speaking, my initial reaction, Nick, is of disappointment personally. I just believe there were upgrades to be had out there. Jim Leonard was my favorite. As far-fetched as it may be, I think he would have changed this defense for the better in a lot of ways. Even somebody like Lou Anarumo, I would have loved to get in here as, to me, a clear upgrade over Shane Bowen. Matt Eberflus, I think, would be a clear upgrade over Shane Bowen. Robert Salah, you probably can't pull out because he's going to go to San Fran and he has better options. But if any of those were interested in joining the Giants, I would have at least liked to explore it, Nick, to see if we could have got an upgrade because there's nothing really about Shane Bowen that excites me outside of his game plan for the Bengals, which I still find to be unbelievable. I'd love to go back and watch again and see if there was anything interesting or if it was just our D-line dominated. But, I mean, they had everyone healthy there, Higgins, Chase, and no one shut down Burrow except for the Giants this year, which is still a phenomenal thing to think about. And he had that nice stretch. But how much of that was just kind of relying on the personnel?
Yeah. Look, with Shane Bowen, he was hamstrung by a weak secondary. I think his defense puts way too much on the linebackers. We saw a regression from Bobby Okereke, and that's not just because of the system, but it's also because of just the overall fundamental nature of less base personnel. I mean, I guess you could say it's a system thing, but when you have a 5-man front in front of you, one of them being Dexter Lawrence, and every gap is covered up and there's no natural bubble, it allows the linebacker to just flow to the ball and scrape over the top and be in position to make the plays. And Okereke and McFadden can do both of that. But when it's an even front and there's those natural bubbles where guards can climb up to you and get you, it's a lot more difficult. And a lot of too high looks, man, a lot of too read type of defenses where those safeties are reading the release of the inside too and basically just turns into man coverage, pattern match type of system. And you're lighter in the box when that's the case. And we saw this, man. Whenever Dexter Lawrence wasn't out there, teams were just like, oh, we're just going to run inside. With Wink Martindale, how many successful runs were in the A gap, the B gap?
Very few.
Very few. Very few. The successful runs came to the outside, and a lot of them were on counter. And that was because the linebackers could not fit, and the edge rushers were really bad, kind of keeping that narrow. But the A gaps and the B gaps, the interior runs, just completely eliminated by the New York Giants under Wink Martindale. With Shane Bowen, it's a lot different. We didn't get that run defense we really wanted with Shane Bowen. I'm on the same train as you. I'm a little disappointed because I do think there are upgrades over there. With that said, I think if the Giants can the Giants offense can give their defense some leads, I think we could see a better version of Shane Bowen's defense. And if you can add some valuable pieces to the secondary, and Deonte Banks isn't terrible like he was this year, and Drew Phillips takes another step, and Tyler Nubin takes another step, I think we can see a slightly better defense as well. You need another defensive lineman, though. You need a quick penetrating defensive lineman. I would like another big run stopper.
Same.
I think the defensive line is such a massive need on this team. We were saying that all offseason last year. We're like, dude, this defensive line is going to be so bad. If anything happens to Dexter Lawrence, they're screwed. And honestly, when Dexter Lawrence went down, the defense solidified from a run stopping standpoint, but it was because the Giants just transitioned their defense to play more base, to have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, to drop a safety down in the box, to play more cover 3, to
which
play
killed
more,
them in the pass game.
which killed them in the passing game. And that's why Lamar Jackson goes off for 5 touchdowns, 297 yards, whatever he did. Right. So, that's how the defense works, man. The pass is married to the run, just like most things in football. And, I'm not surprised, I guess, by it. I'm a little surprised. I thought he would be a fall guy, but what are we going to do at this point? He's going to be retained, and hopefully the Giants can get those leads. And if there's any consolation to it, they had 45 sacks this year. I think the last time they had that many sacks in a season was, I think 2013 or 2014. It was because like JPP had like 12 and a half that one year. I think they've had like 40 2 or 3 years within that time. There were a couple of years where they had like no sacks, dude. The Giants, it was like very embarrassing. But yeah, overall, it's not the best situation.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. I think I agree with you. There will be some improvement in year 2. Just generally, just players on the same page more in the system, better communication, things like that. And what you mentioned is true. There are moments I feel like he is doing a good job as a defensive coordinator. It's just a matter of like, what will the Giants do now? Because we heard John Maris say, I hated seeing offenses go up and down the field on us. And so says to me is, well, you didn't fire a defensive coordinator. Look toward free agency. I think the Giants will be spending a lot of money in free agency on the defensive side of the ball this offseason after spending much more on the offensive side of the ball last offseason. Defensive back, maybe a corner, and likely and hopefully multiple defensive linemen. I really do believe they need to you talked about pouring assets into the quarterback room, which obviously I agree with you on. I think they need to pour assets into that and defensive interior line. To me, in a lot of ways, it's almost more important, to me at least, than corner, for the reason being, I don't believe corners are easy to find. And I think corners are a lot of times just waste of picks, waste of free agent signings. It's a rough position, a lot of bad players, very few good players, in my opinion. The more I watch the NFL, Nick, the more I just think there are just very few good corners in the NFL, like solid, good corners. A lot of people are just bad at the position. It's a tough position to play. And I don't always love burning big key assets at it.
And it's so obvious who the good ones are when you're watching. You don't even need to watch the all-22. Obviously, that gives you more of an advantage. But you could just watch Derek Stingley Jr. Excellent. Amazing cornerback.
Right.
Patrick Surtain. Excellent. Amazing cornerback. And there's like other guys who have like huge reputations, like Sauce Gardner. But then you watch him and you're like, how good is this guy?
Right.
Like there is a they vacillate between being that elite cornerback and being like average. Whereas like Stingley Jr. and Surtain are almost always on that elite. Like they'll get beat here every now and again, but they're just like consistent. Consistency is everything with that position when you want to be on that top echelon with any position. But it's just, you're right, they're few and far between.
And to make my point, like the flip side of that is you go out in free agency, you sign a DJ Reader, you know what you're getting, and he is what you wanted to get. He is what you get every single time you sign. You watch him on tape, he's exactly what you signed him to be. And that's where I want to put my assets into the interior defensive line. Because to me, it's more important to winning than corner. And maybe not more important if you can get one of those lucky shutdown guys like a Surtain, like you're talking about. But those are so hard to get that it becomes more important and easier to find and easier, a less of a miss rate, less of a bust rate at that position. So I'm hoping they pour those assets in there. I think they will. But I want to go over one thing with you on Bowen before we end this discussion on Bowen. It's something that Carl Banks, a friend of the show, tweeted out, and I wanted to get your take on this. He said, if Bowen is actually retained, this was, I think, after the report dropped, here are the mandates that he's asking for. Carl Banks, from a, played position, played linebacker, knows defense really inside out, watches all the tape. He said, 1, define what type of defense you are. 2, show me scheme flexibility. Maximize the strength of your best players. In-game adjustments. He said it shouldn't take 6 weeks to stop outside zone runs. He said, Deonte Banks, you got to get him on track. And Bobby Okereke, got to get him going back to what he was in Wink's defense. He said also be fundamentally sound. There's too many instances of poor fundamentals. Be situationally astute. And there must be scheme-enabled success for players. Any thoughts on those 6 things that Carl kind of went over?
I think he nails it. I think he nails it with a lot. I think a lot of that could just apply to any defense, but we didn't necessarily see any of that at a consistent rate this season, right? Especially like the outside zone runs. It's just like, can you
Yeah.
set an edge? Can you flow to the play side? Can you guys be disciplined? Can you be sound? I think players like Drew Phillips really help with a lot of this whenever you want to go into nickel personnel, because if they run towards the nickel side, he is physical and pound for pound strong enough to execute that run fit well. But Giants, from a run defense standpoint, were pretty bad this year overall. But yeah, Carl, man, he knows his stuff, and he did a good job articulating some of the things he wants to see. I don't know if all of that can be fixed
Yeah.
in 1 year. Like, how much is this going to be 2016, Dan? Where we just pour money into the defense and we get a defensive lineman, a stud corner, and an edge rusher like we did with Snacks and Janoris Jenkins and Olivier Vernon. And then are we going to be good like we were? But were we really good? Because then the next year we saw what happened in 2017. So I don't know, man. I don't love fixing problems through spending money in free agency. Because you look at the good football teams, they add key players and they bring them in and they assimilate into that locker room, and then they become sometimes leaders, which is great, which we see that with Philadelphia, we see it with Green Bay and teams like that. But these teams, like we know, New York Giants, they'll go out, they'll pour money into free agency, bring them in, and it's a toxic environment, and there's no respect for the coach, and everyone's pointing fingers and like, what the hell am I doing? I took all this money, and I don't necessarily want that, but I think that's the only real course of action Shane and Dable have to have success next season, because you have one draft class coming up, and I don't know if those guys who you've already drafted are going to develop. So what other course of action do they have? And they're incredibly desperate right now. Their seats are very hot.
Yeah, and that's why I think they will be pouring
They
those
will be
assets
doing
into
it.
free agency.
They will be.
I do think it'll come on the defense of the ball. So, look, hopefully they work out and hopefully they can become long-term pieces there. But it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, so far the news has not been as expected, I guess, from Giants fans. Look, they retained everybody so far: Shane Dable and now Shane Bowen. So running it back with this
Any
group.
positional coaches too? Like,
Yeah,
I haven't heard anything about the
nothing
positional.
on that. Yeah, so
Interesting.
still a little early, January 13th, but to all those listening, thank you so much for tuning in to the Big Blue Banter podcast. Not much news yet on the Giants front, more to come. Senior Bowl coming. We'll talk about that and other things that develop as the season goes. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment to help us grow the show. Stick with us. A lot of good content coming. For those who don't know, during draft season, it's really when we cook the most. Pods a day, a lot of film breakdowns. And so good stuff coming. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.